What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Spark to Fire. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes, and today I've got Erleen Hatfield with me. Erleen has over 25 years of experience in the structural design of a wide range of complex projects, including high-rise sports facilities, commercial, cultural, residential, and academic buildings. She is both a licensed structural engineer and architect. She is the managing partner of the Hatfield Group, a New York-based, globally minded team of engineers, designers, and thinkers dedicated to bringing architectural thinking to the field of engineering. On top of running Hatfield Group, Erleen has also spent the last 15 years teaching courses at the Yale School of Architecture and frequently speaks on innovation of architecture and structural engineering. Erleen, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Oh, great. My pleasure to be here.
So we usually start off these episodes by learning a little bit about who you were as a kid. I think it's really important for our audience to get context of who are listening to here. So talk about what your childhood was like.
Sure. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I went to Southeast High School. I was always kind of nerdy. I liked putting together things like, puzzles and, building things. And I had a good, happy childhood in Nebraska. Lincoln's great.
Awesome. And what was your rise into the world of architecture and structural engineering? Like, what was it like from going from high school, and when did you decide that you wanted to make that path?
Yeah, interesting. I didn't really know when I left high school what I wanted to do. When you take those assessment surveys, I'd always end up like engineer or accountant or something along kind of the math field. But I wanted to do something more creative. And so architecture seemed like a great fit. And so I ended up going to architecture school at the University of Nebraska, and I graduated with a degree there. But just going through the program and going through designing buildings and studio classes, I just realized I'm much more of an engineer than an architect. So I finished my degree in architecture and then went straight on and got my master's degree in engineering.
Awesome. So as you're going up inside of that world, talk about some of your experiences you had as you were going through the world after college.
Oh gosh. So after college, I started working in Lincoln. Actually, during college, I was working at an architecture firm in Lincoln. And we were doing, it was great because I was learning all kinds of different things. It's a smaller firm, so you get to do a little bit of everything. It was really a great experience. But I knew that I wanted to work on bigger buildings. As a structural engineer, I wanted to work on tall buildings. I wanted to work on long span structures, things that are more challenging for structural engineers. And so although I worked in Lincoln for a few years, I started looking, at bigger cities where there'd be more opportunities. So I ended up leaving Lincoln and I went to Chicago for a couple of years and worked as a structural engineer there.
Awesome. So what were some of the projects you worked on when you were in Chicago?
Oh gosh, Chicago was a blast. I worked on a project at Washington University in St. Louis, which many people don't know, but is a high seismic zone. So there's all kinds of complications for structural engineers in St. Louis.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I also worked on a project that was going to be the world's tallest building. It was Project 2000, they called it. And the developer was actually, he was murdered, sadly enough and strangely enough, by the same guy that killed Versace. So he was a big developer in Chicago. Yeah, I know, nuts, right? And our project was super cool. And literally it was going to be 2,000 feet, which was the height that you can build under the FAA regulations. And the plan was to surpass the Sears Tower at the time. But then the whole thing just stopped cold as soon as the developer wasn't around anymore. So that was interesting, sad ending to that project. But I got to work on all kinds of cool things. Coming from Nebraska, where I was doing, small scale, like middle schools and, 1 and 2 story buildings, like a complete change. It was super exciting.
Yeah. That comes with its own host of new problems. And how are you, obviously you handle stress a lot differently than most people, I would imagine, because you're looking at things from such an analytical perspective. What do you think, how does your mind work when you're going into those projects, thinking about working on the world's tallest building at that time? That's crazy. That's awesome.
It was awesome. I had really good, managers and mentors at the time. So it wasn't just like it was me. It was a whole team of people. In engineering, you understand where you can push things. You understand where you can't. The code has all kinds of safety factors built into it. But there's always tremendous pressure and challenges when you're doing something completely new and different. And so it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of research. And, I'm very sort of passionate about engineering and building design. And so, I spend a lot of time trying to understand exactly what it is we're doing and making sure that everything is right.
Yeah. And who were some of the people you looked up to at that point, especially as you were continuing to grow inside your career, just fresh out of college in Chicago?
Oh gosh, in Chicago, there was a guy, Bob Magruder, who's great. I still see him every now and then when I'm in Chicago. Another guy named Cos Solit, who is fantastic. He has his own firm in Chicago now. There's a guy, Joe Burns, who's with Thornton Tomasetti, who I moved over to Thornton Tomasetti, a different structural engineering firm when I was in Chicago. And then, the mentor that when I got to New York, Tom Scarangelo, that made a huge impact on my career, was a tremendous help.
And you were there at Tomasetti for quite a while, right?
Yeah, just 12 years, I think it was, almost 12 years.
Yeah, and so talk about some of the exciting projects you've worked on since that time or during that time.
Oh my gosh. So then I left Chicago and transferred with the firm that I was in to New York with the intention of going back to Chicago. So I was just transferring for like 6 months. And,
Okay.
this is like the end of the 90s, right? And so, you pay rent with a check, and we'd go back to my apartment in Chicago once a month and swap out CDs and clothes and come back to New York. And then after like 6 months, I finally was like, or actually I was about a year of doing this back and forth. I asked my firm, do you guys want me to stay in New York, or do you want me to go back? Because I liked both cities. I had friends in both places. Long story short, but I ended up staying in New York. At the time, I was working on the Detroit Lions football stadium project, and it was fantastic. It was the coolest project. The roof trusses of the Detroit Lions stadium, it's a closed building, right? There's a roof on it. They span 690 feet. They're 90 feet deep, like just huge scale of project. And, that was really, really exciting. And so that's really what got me to New York. And then, I ended up staying.
And you have a long history of working on really badass projects. That is something that you've become incredibly well known for. So I want to continue hearing about all those. You've got a lot of history there.
Well, cool. Well, I've worked on a lot of sports projects, and sports are just near and dear to people's hearts, right? And when they tore down Yankee Stadium, people were like ripping the cup holders out of the old stadium and the signs off the wall. Nobody does that with their office building. So,
Right.
So stadiums are far more exciting, but, I've worked on all kinds of things. So like in Nebraska, there's the Quest Center up in Omaha, which is now, I think, the CHI Health. I did the Pinnacle Bank Arena in Lincoln, which was fantastic to be able to work on that in my hometown. I worked on Barclays Center in New York. I've worked on all kinds of sports projects. But the one that probably most people talk about is the Atlanta Falcons new stadium. And that project has a roof on it that's retractable, that's unlike any other roof in the world, actually. It's never been done before. So I get a lot of questions about the Falcons Stadium.
Yeah, and I'd please expand on that, because I think people, it is a really crazy looking stadium from the top down, and it just has such a unique look to it. So talk a little bit about what it was like to go from concept to reality, or spark to fire on that, if you will.
Yeah, sure. The genesis of that project was, the architect is super creative, and he's actually from Kansas City, Bill Johnson. He's with a firm called HOK. And we decided to team up and chase after this project. And what that means is the architects and engineers put together like a concept design. And then there were 5 teams of architects and engineers that go present their concepts to the owner, and the owner picks a design team to carry their concept forward. So we wanted to come up with something really cool. And so we invited Bill, the architect, to come to my office in New York and just sit around and sketch stuff up and brainstorm and what we call design charrettes, just trying to do something different that would really get us noticed and distinguish us from the other teams, but would also be super cool, for the owner, for the fans, and everybody who'd ever go in that stadium. So we started out with this idea that retractable roof stadiums open too slowly. Right. If you've ever been to a retractable roof stadium, like it's 2 roofs or 2 panels, they open up, it takes 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It's kind of like, it's not that exciting, right?
Right.
And you're like, you look at it, you're like, is the roof open? I don't know. I think I can see the sky. I don't know.
Is it moving?
Is it moving? Peace out. Have you ever had that experience, right?
Yeah.
And it's just such a letdown, So
Right.
So trying to figure out a way to make it move faster, right? To open quickly. So the Falcons roof opens in like 7 minutes, less than 7 minutes actually, and it closes in about 6. And so the idea was, what if we didn't go so far, right? So instead of moving like 500 feet, can we move 200 or 250? And instead of having two gigantic pieces that move, what if we broke it up into smaller pieces that moved a shorter distance? And this whole idea of this pinwheel or aperture, people call it different things, the way that roof opened. Really, the architects came up with this idea and called me and said, because we were still sketching, they left with, we both kind of, Bill left, he had all these sketches, we had sketches, we were all like communicating back and forth. And so when Bill calls me and says, we came up with this idea, does this work? Like, is this even structurally possible? Yeah, seriously. I mean, it was crazy. And, we looked at it and I called him back and said, yes, we can make this work. This has never been done before. It's basically the roof cantilevers over 200 feet. There's 8 panels that cantilever out into the middle of the field 200 feet. And just to give you perspective on that, 200 feet is like a 20-story building sideways, like laying on top of the roof. There's 8 of them and they all move back and forth.
It's incredible.
So yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just, a crazy, not crazy, but, totally different approach to retractable roof. And the idea is really to do something exciting for the fans, something exciting for the team, distinguish Atlanta from all the other stadiums. When you're in Atlanta, you're there. And that you're the home of the Falcons or, the Atlanta United soccer team. So yeah, very challenging project, very tight schedule, lots of technical challenges, but, it's open, it's operational, it's great. It's been, it's won a lot of awards, lots of good success. Oh, and there's one other thing I wanted to mention about that stadium that we had a very tiny role in, and others did a fantastic job on this, is that it's the first LEED Platinum sustainable stadium. So what that LEED is a measure of how sustainable your stadium is. And it has to do with things like recycled materials and how far materials travel and indoor air quality and how much electricity you use, all these different metrics. And you get a score. And it's the first LEED Platinum stadium ever. And that's largely due to the operations director of the Falcons, this guy, Scott Johnson. He's amazing. And it's a great example for all the other stadiums out there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was actually looking that up when I was researching you a little bit more, and I saw that was a title associated with your name, and these projects is something that you're known for. And so you had a really exciting experience when you were pitching that to the owner. And I want to have the listeners know a little bit more about that, because that's a really interesting story as well.
Sure. So we came up with this idea, and we had this guy, Chuck Hoberman, who's a friend of mine, join us for some of these sort of design brainstorming sessions in New York. And Chuck is a professor, and Chuck's a great guy. He invented what we call the Hoberman sphere, which is a toy that most kids have probably seen. It's like it's a sphere, looks like an erector set, almost like in the shape of a circle or a ball. And then you pull it apart and it grows and it becomes like 5 times the size. And then you can shrink it and bring it back up. So Chuck invents this toy, and Chuck does all kinds of movable things. He does movable sculptures and roofs and things, smaller scale roofs like skylights. So we have Chuck involved. And so Chuck gave us lots of good sort of guidance on how a retractable roof would work. And what Chuck also did is he put together this model. And of course, we're trying to figure this thing out and advance it as far as possible. So we want to take a model to Atlanta as part of the interview process and to share with the owner our design concept. And we're 3D printing it all over the place, because back then there weren't that many 3D printers. And when you 3D print, you get a piece, it's like the size of a microwave. And we called, it's like all you can print at one time is like one little piece. And we called the Georgia Convention Center, which is where the interviews were being held. And we said, what is the smallest door? Like, how big can our model be that we can actually get it through the door? And so, it's a convention center, so you can go through the loading dock and, these big double doors. So I think it was like 4 feet was the smallest dimension. So we planned to make this model like 4 feet by like 5.5 feet. It's huge. And so we're printing this stuff all over the country because we're trying to do it as fast as we can. We have pieces being FedExed in constantly. Chuck puts this whole thing together in his shop, which was awesome. And So we go down, we put it in the van. So that the guy drives it down to Atlanta. We show up, and Chuck has rigged it all up with all this like mechanism so that the roof opens. So in the interview, we asked Arthur Blank, the owner, if he would step up and come up to the table. And we had this big black tarp over the model. It's all very dramatic. And we whipped the tarp off, and there's this red button. And we were like, Arthur or Mr. Black, would you like to press the button? And he does. And we were like, Chuck, you've got to make this thing work. It's just got to work once. And when we push the button, it's absolutely, the roof has to open on this model because we're showing everybody our idea, and this is it. And so it's very, very stressful. But Arthur Blank presses the button, the roof opens, you can see the whole crazy aperture concept. And I think, that was a big part of us actually winning the kind of the I guess that whole concept phase. So, and getting to do the rest of the project. Yeah, it was fun. It was crazy.
And how many millions are in that stadium? How many?
I think it ended up being 1.5 billion or right around there.
Incredible.
Which is incredible. But, when you look at the cost of the stadium in Los Angeles, or that does not have a retractable roof, or the stadium in Vegas that also does not have a retractable roof, they're significantly more, almost double the cost of the Falcons Stadium.
Wow. That's nuts. So are you guys actively looking for fun projects like that now? Or like when you go out into the market and you guys have opportunities, what are some of the stuff that you wanting to take on at this time?
So I started my own firm since then. And so what we are doing are looking for interesting and fun projects. I've been in business for so long. I've done a lot of things. So, we're always looking to push the envelope and do, interesting things that really, not just for the sake of doing interesting, but helps our clients find new ways to do things to either save money or do something different that helps our end clients or the people who go into our buildings. But, sports is a big part of it. We're working on the new training facility for the University of Nebraska. We're super excited about that. It's really cool. The design's coming along well. So that's one of the projects we're working on. We're working on a museum in the South that's really going to be interesting. We're doing a bunch of buildings here in New York City that are fun. So yeah, we're doing all kinds of projects right now.
And you worked on the World Trade Center Memorial Museum as well, right?
I did. I worked on the 9/11 museum. And what was interesting about that museum sits over the top of the subway is underneath, right? There's the mall is underneath. So there's only actually about 5 or 6 points where that goes all the way down to the ground. Otherwise, it's all like on transfer girders. But the thing that was really kind of meant a lot to me is during 9/11, when it happened, it was on a Tuesday, and I went down to the site on Wednesday and worked on site for 2 weeks straight. I didn't leave, as did a whole bunch of other structural engineers. We all went down there to help. And so then getting, 10 years later to actually work on the museum there and be a part of that was really special.
Wait, so you were going down far before it was ever built, and you guys were working there. I mean, obviously that's a part of your design process, but explain that piece again.
Yeah, sorry. So 9/11, when the plane struck the World Trade Center was 2001. So literally the next day, there was a huge pile, and we're just calling it Ground Zero, right? It was still on fire. We're looking for people. That whole time, when all that was going on, the firm I was working for, enlisted a whole group of engineers, and we all went down there to help with the fire department, with the police department, with FEMA, with everybody who was down there. And so, I was part of that whole sort of, I don't even know what to call it, process of trying to just help everybody who was down there. I'll tell you a funny story about that, actually. So, it's crazy emergency, and Giuliani's the mayor. And so they set up offices, like the headquarters, right in a school right nearby the World Trade Center site. And so the mayor's office takes the principal's office and kind of all the kind of that space. And the fire department, I think they took the auditorium, and the police department, they were in the gym, and they all had like classrooms and things like that where they were like meeting, and it's all in this elementary school. So where do they put the engineers? They put us in the kindergarten room. And so the chairs are like 7 inches off the ground. We're all sitting there with like our calculators and, our code books, our steel manuals, looking at stuff, like on these tiny little tables. It was the silliest thing ever.
I bet that was a sight. Hopefully somebody has a picture of that.
Oh my gosh, I have a picture somewhere. That that was back when you really didn't have very good pictures on your phone, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so walk me through what you guys were doing in there that day. So that 2 weeks, that month. I don't know how long you were there.
I stayed until March. I mean, I'm back and forth. I was there 2 weeks straight, but then I ended up like having a shift. We had shifts. So I was working there until March of the following year. There were other people who were there a lot longer than I was, who were there like 40 hours a week. I was maybe going like 20 hours a week. But after that first 2 weeks, but I'll give you an example. So the pile of debris kind of it fell in, and it was created like almost like a cone shape in the middle of the site. And so you couldn't really go from the wall, then it drops down, and then it kind of starts to climb up because there's this huge pile of debris.
Right.
We did things like we asked the workers down there, go find the straightest pieces of steel you can find, and we made a bridge out of the debris of the job site that went from sort of the sidewalk over this kind of I don't even know what to call it, like valley, and then onto the pile of debris, and that they could drive trucks and cars and things across it. To just making sure that the people who were down there were being safe. And so they were cutting with like acetylene torches, they were cutting off beams and things like that. And you have to realize, like, nobody knew what was going on. It was completely crazy. These guys are all looking for their friends. They're doing things that don't make sense. They're exhausted. And so we were technically called site safety engineers, like really just there to make sure that somebody wasn't driving a crane on something that wasn't stable, or they needed to get access to something. We'd figure out a way to build with pieces that were out there and build something to give them access. So, and then in addition to that, I did all kinds of inspections of the buildings surrounding the World Trade Center, because we didn't know if the buildings nearby sustained damage and needed repair, or if there's something going on there. So, and it wasn't just me, it was a whole, big group of engineers that were doing this, but going into buildings and just making sure that they were all structurally sound. So there was a lot going on down there with kind of the engineers helping out.
Yeah, that's a piece that a lot of people probably don't think about. When you're thinking about fire, you got firefighters down there, you've got cops down there, you've got city officials down there, but engineers, like, just figuring out how to deal with that mass of steel that completely just changed shape now. And I mean, that you have a whole new structure that you're now dealing with that's highly dangerous, highly unstable, and could, cutting the wrong beam could be you could change everything at that point. So did you have people on the ground as well that were looking at, like, analyzing that as they were deciding what pieces to cut? Like, that had to be really analytical, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, well, it could have been more analytical, but we had people on the ground. We all had like computers and calculators, and we all brought code books and things like that with us. And so, yeah, and then we would call back to the office if we got stuck on something, and try to get help on things like that. But, a lot of it was just having enough experience to know that, when steel gets to a certain temperature, it loses its strength, so you can't drive a truck on it, like those sort of things. And then some of it, yeah, we're doing a lot of calculations trying to make sure that things work. So it's just a whole series of different things. Right.
So one comment that I heard about, I think reading into you a little bit, was somebody had the comment, well, you tell that structural engineer he did a great job. And I think somebody at the stadium, at the Falcons Stadium, turned around and said, actually, it was a she. And I'll make sure and tell her. So, two things. What did you think when you heard that? And then second of all, what has it been like to, not only grow inside of a pretty male dominated environment, but be extremely successful in the face of that?
Yeah. Well, that comment was actually by state senator of Georgia.
So oh, no.
when they told me about that, it's pretty funny. It made me happy that somebody actually stood up and corrected them, corrected him. But no, it certainly has been a challenge over the years. I think it's to be a woman in such a male-dominated field, and it's not just engineering, but all the other sort of male-dominated fields out there. I graduated with my master's degree with, there's maybe one other woman out of like 20 kids in my class. Mm-hmm. In meetings, it's generally all, at least at the start, it was generally all men. And so, it's been great to see the field change. I think it's a lot better now for women. Right. And I think women have a lot, it's not that women, I don't think women had opportunities, in the 90s and the 80s. It's just those opportunities, I think, were all limited. It's harder to go up the ladder when your bosses are all men. It just makes things a little bit more challenging. It's not that it's impossible. I just think it's harder. And I was really, really fortunate that I had a mentor, Tom Scarangello at Thornton Tomasetti, who was absolutely fabulous. And it was great. And, looked at the work that I did and what I contributed and was so fair with everybody. And so, I just got lucky that I found the right person to work for. But it's been great starting Hatfield Group and creating an engineering firm where we can hire more women, we can really promote women, and encourage young women and to be in the engineering field. So yeah, it's really been interesting to see how things have changed, and we still have a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Right. And I was just speaking to somebody that's in architecture at UNL right now about how much easier it's going to be for her to move up those ranks because of people like you. And I think that that's really important. Like when they get to see an example of success, just like in anything, once you see somebody else do it, you start to realize like, oh, that could be me. I could do that. That's really important. So what lessons have you taken away from like building your own business now? You've had, when you've gotten into all these other firms, immediately like all of the rules and regulations and guidelines and the way that the firm operates from a cultural standpoint, all those things were lined out when you got there. What was it like now to create your own culture and your own standards, your own rules?
Oh my gosh, it was fabulous. It's such a great thing, like to create your own culture. Having been at two big firms and then, a smaller firm in Nebraska, I got to experience kind of a range of different types of cultures. And so really being able to set things up the way that I wanted to, it's been great. I really feel very strongly that you can be successful in business and treat your employees really well. In fact, I think the better you treat people, the more successful you will be. So I think, being able to set things up in the right way and, give our employees, give our engineers, as much responsibility as they want, trust them, give them the tools that they need, and, watch these guys and girls grow. Maybe I should cut that out, but say, watch, our engineers really grow, is important. And so that's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have any specific books that you read when you were starting your own business? I mean, obviously you've been well read in the world of engineering and everything along those lines, but from a personal development, career development type of mindset, I mean, have you had any books that have really changed your life?
Some books that I read that when I got started to really help me a lot was, I think it's called The Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy. Another book that I read was Built to Sell, John Warlow. I thought that was really helpful. It was about organizing efficient sales processes, not necessarily about selling, but how you organize around it. Then there was another book I read, Influence, Science, and Practice by this guy, Robert Cialdini. That was really interesting as well. Really just kind of the science says about persuading people. So those were the main ones, but I read as many books about sales and marketing as I could because that's one of the weaker areas that I have. I also took classes on Coursera just about financial fundamentals. Just a refresher, what a balance sheet and your profit and loss statement. We look at all these things, but I never actually had to put one together. I've always been a CFO, so just making sure that I was fully kind of up to speed on how all that works. And then, I went to seminars, marketing seminars, how to pitch your firm, what your elevator pitch should be, how to start a business, those types of things. So I spent actually quite a bit of time trying to get myself, as knowledgeable about business as possible. And it's ongoing constantly. I'm
Right.
still, looking at different things that we can do better.
What's the future of Hatfield Group look like?
Oh gosh. Well, in my head, I want to be, 500 people,
Do
working
you,
all
you,
over the place.
you do want to be 500 people?
I do. I do.
Awesome.
The reason why is because I think that a firm of that size in kind of the engineering architecture space has influence, right? There's so many firms that are like 20, 30 people out there, and you kind of get lost with everybody else. And so, look, I want to change the way that we practice, right? I want to make buildings more sustainable. I want to make them more economical. I want to make great experiences that people, when they walk into a building, have. I want buildings to fill people with awe. And so, to do that, I think you've got to be at a bigger scale for the most part, not always, but we're doing some very cool things now, like the Nebraska building, the performance and training facility.
Right.
But I really think to get into a lot of the sort of having more influence over the built environment, we just need to be bigger.
Right. Yeah, but there is something to be said about that, though. If you've got just, especially when you're approaching people with billions and billions of dollars, they look at you as somebody like, okay, well, do they have the wavelength to take something like this on? It's like, well, if you've got that many people, there's a really good chance they do. And then another thing that I've learned too is even if your company does grow really large and you are working on lots of massive projects, another thing that that companies will start asking is like, oh, we know you're working on all these amazing projects. Do you have time for us?
Right. Exactly.
And I'm sure you've probably ran into that as well. If, because some company will find like, oh, you're doing the stadium project, and then like the next stadium project comes up somewhere else. That's probably one thing they would ask you is, do you even have time for this?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that happens all the time. So just larger scale helps with things like that.
For sure. What advice would you give to, first of all, any women that want to start their own business, and then just kind of broad advice for starting your own business as well? I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I'll start with broad advice. Do it. If you want to start your own business, go do it. If you're really passionate about what you do and you enjoy it, definitely start your own business. I waited awfully long in my career to start my own business, and the one thing I regret is I wish I would have done it sooner. It's frightening. It certainly is a leap of faith. There's all kinds of things you have to figure out, but it's totally worth it. So that would be my piece of advice for kind of general for everybody. And for women in particular, I think it's harder for women. I think it's more challenging, but I think those are all things that can be overcome. And I think by doing a good job and not, how can I say it? By doing a good job and by gaining respect as quickly as possible, you can break down barriers much quicker than you used to be able to. And I think it's a lot easier to do that now. It's not, like I said, it's not perfect, but it's certainly are plenty of opportunities out there.
Yeah.
And I think by being, smart and hardworking will get you a long way.
What advice would you have for somebody that's an aspiring architect or structural engineer that's just getting out of school?
So for students just getting out of school, I would say follow what you're interested in and what you're really passionate about, because I think both architecture and engineering are fields where you spend a lot of time at work, you spend a lot of time researching, you spend a lot of time working. There can be a lot of late nights, and so you really have to love what you do. So that means finding the projects, the firms that do the types of projects that you like. So if you're really interested in sports, find a sports firm. If you want to do schools, because schools are really cool, go find a firm that does schools. So find the thing that really gets you excited, because we spend way too much time in the office not to, or now anyways, at work or doing work, not to do what you love.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I remember thinking about that as I was leaving school too. I ended up going a very different direction when I left school with my degree, but regardless, it's something where you have to be passionate about what you do, because you're not going to even feel good about putting in those long hours. You're going to be miserable. And that's half of it, is like, you did put in some probably pretty crazy hours. I'm sure you put in some 100-hour weeks at the time when, especially, on some of your massive projects, right? But it doesn't feel like work when you're doing something that you really, really love.
Exactly. So that would be my advice for young students coming out of school.
Awesome. Erleen, thank you for answering all these questions and for showing up today. I really appreciate your time, and this has been really interesting. I appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Thanks for having me.
Guys, it's going to do it for another episode of Spark to Fire. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And please give us a rating and a review on iTunes. That is how we move up in the rankings and get more cool people like Erleen on the show. Thank you again, Erleen. I really appreciate your time today, and keep striking.